We moved to Evergreen Pines for the quiet. Not for the scenery or the schools or the reputation of the HOA. Definitely not for the HOA. Just quiet. After 22 years in and out of military housing, then another 8 living next to a freeway in a rental duplex. While my wife ran training programs for local law enforcement, we needed quiet like lungs need air. So when we found a place tucked away on a cul-de-sac beside a pine-draped retention lake in Pinewood Retreat, we made the leap. No looking back. The house wasn't flashy. Brick front gray shutters, a porch swing already broken in by the previous owners. I loved it immediately. The backyard opened into a wooded strip of protected green space, and the air smelled like wet bark and honeysuckle. My wife, Kara Randall, looked out the window the first day and said, "Feels like no one's watching. I wish that had been true." She unpacked boxes, like she was still running logistics. Every item had a system plates stacked by type winter gear in vacuum bags, tactical gear in the mudroom closet next to the dog's treats. Her efficiency didn't surprise me. It was just who she was. Kara never bragged, never had to. But most people, if they knew who she really was, wouldn't have dared raise their voice. She wasn't just a former sergeant major with deployment stripes and years of field command. She was the tactical lead for the city's SWAT readiness program. She trained the people other people called when things got bad. She moved like muscle memory thought 5 moves ahead and had the patience of a surgeon with a broken clock. But here she was, just my wife. The woman who made pancakes on Sunday, who kept her hair in a braid when she jogged, who kissed the top of my head without warning while I read the paper. Our first few weeks in Evergreen Pines were unremarkable in the best way. We waved at neighbors, planted hydrangeas, and repainted the mailbox post to match the Evergreen Pines Homeowners Association guidelines. Even Kara, with all her skepticism about civilian living, seemed to be exhaling slowly into this new life. She woke every morning at 5:30 to jog laps around the neighborhood loop, then did her strength and conditioning out back, nothing crazy. Push-ups, burpees, resistance band drills, maybe some mock door entry movements with a weighted backpack. It looked intense if you didn't know what you were seeing. But it was training, controlled, purposeful. The same routine she'd used to help officers avoid panic in the real world. And that's when the first note appeared. It was taped to our mailbox. No envelope, no name. "This is a family neighborhood. Please refrain from violent or threatening behavior in your yard. People are watching." Kara read it once, then again. "Threatening," she said deadpan. I took the note, smoothed it flat, and slid it into the junk drawer. Probably just a neighbor who doesn't know what they're seeing. Or one who sees exactly what they fear, she said already, walking to the garage to finish her cool down. The next morning, I noticed 2 women on the sidewalk pause while Kara was doing ladder drills in the backyard. They talked quietly, arms crossed. One had a small dog that tugged nervously at its leash, uninterested in gossip. Kara didn't stop. She never did. Later that afternoon, we got our first visit. Her name was Karen Blevins. Of course it was. Khakis pressed, blouse pastel, hair tight ponytail, her smile was painted on like an HOA warning sign, trying to pass for a welcome mat. "I'm the chairwoman of our Evergreen Pines Homeowners Association Board." She began offering a clipboard instead of a handshake. "John Randall," I replied, taking it without looking. "And you must be," she peered past me into the foyer. "My wife's name is Kara." Karen gave a tight nod. "Yes, well, we've had a few concerns raised by residents regarding some of the activity taking place in your yard." She said activity like it was a crime. "Activity," I repeated. "Yes, early mornings, intense physical movements. Some of the children on our street have seen what appears to be combat preparation. It's creating anxiety." "She's working out," I said plainly. Karen blinked. "With military equipment, with weighted training packs. You want to come try one on?" She ignored the jab. "We're simply trying to preserve a sense of calm here. Routine is important. Familiarity. Safety. You understand." I didn't reply. "We ask that homeowners be mindful of the optics of certain behaviors. It's not about intent, you see. It's about perception." I stared at her for a moment, then smiled. "Let me guess. This was voted on in a closed meeting." She tilted her head. "Concern doesn't require a vote." Kara appeared in the hallway behind me. Freshly showered, hair braided, tank top and cargo joggers, calm. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Just a neighbor visit," I said, stepping aside. Karen's expression shifted. She straightened the clipboard. We were just discussing community standards. Kara looked her over once. "Would you like me to stop breathing too, or is push-ups your main concern?" Karen stiffened. "There's no need to be defensive. There's also no need to report on someone without speaking to them first." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. "I've lived on forward operating bases, ma'am," Kara said, voice calm as morning fog. "I know the difference between concern and control. One looks out for people. The other watches them." Karen stared for half a beat, then offered a clipped goodbye, and retreated down the drive, her heels clicking like an echo of unease. We didn't speak about it that night. Not in detail. Just looked at each other across the dinner table, while the lasagna cooled and the dog snored underfoot. But something had shifted. The quiet was cracking, and someone was watching. For a few days, nothing happened. We thought maybe it had passed, maybe Karen had made her little power move and backed off once she realized we weren't the sort to be intimidated by a clipboard and a neighborhood charter. But trouble doesn't always arrive with sirens and shouting. Sometimes it creeps in through the hedges and settles like fog. It started with the looks. I'd be mowing the front yard, and I'd catch Mrs. Susan Langford across the street, watching from her window with her phone in hand. The kind of watching that wasn't curiosity, but quiet inventory. Tallying things, recording patterns. Sometimes I'd wave. She never waved back. Then the whispers began. At the mailbox, two men I'd spoken with just the week before, Tom Harrison and Greg Miller, retirees, who spent most mornings debating fishing lines, suddenly grew cold. They didn't ask about Boone, my Labrador. They didn't mention the weather. They just nodded stiffly and looked past me like I wasn't there. I'd heard this sort of silence before. In briefing rooms. In deployments when a unit had a mole or someone broke protocol. It wasn't anger. It was mistrust marinated in someone else's version of the story. And I knew whose story they were hearing. Kara kept her routine the same. Up before dawn, jog, stretch, weighted backpack. Tactical form drills in the back patio, not unlike the hundreds of training programs she'd led for the SWAT candidates at the Evergreen Pines Training Academy. The problem was perception. To anyone who didn't understand what they were seeing or who'd been spoon-fed the idea that a strong woman in military gear was automatically a threat, it looked like she was preparing for something violent. It didn't matter that she always stayed within our property line. It didn't matter that there was no noise, no disturbance, nothing out of order. It just looked unfamiliar. And in Evergreen Pines, unfamiliar things drew attention. One morning, Kara came in from training and dropped her pack by the door. I was pouring coffee. "Two cars slowed down today," she said. "Same ones from yesterday." "License plates?" I asked out of habit. She nodded. "Georgia plates, one SUV, one sedan. Black with tinted windows, no HOA decals. Think Karen's watching you now?" She shrugged. "I think she never stopped." I looked at her face, calm, steady. But her jaw was tight. "She wants to push a reaction," I said. Kara nodded. "But she'll get none." That night, a new note appeared. Not in the mailbox, not on the porch, taped to our trash bin in red ink. "We don't want violence here. You are not welcome. No signature." I peeled it off and showed it to Kara. She read it, then folded it twice and dropped it into the kitchen trash. "She's escalating," she said. "Passive threats. Testing the limits. She doesn't know your limits. She doesn't know mine," Kara said, her voice low. "Which makes her dangerous." That same evening, as I walked Boone down the loop, I passed Karen's house. Her lights were on, blinds open. She stood inside the kitchen speaking to someone in a police uniform, not an officer I recognized. Likely a friend. Maybe someone she was trying to bring into her plan. I made a note of it. Not paranoia, just preparation. Kara had taught me that long ago. Document everything. Facts are your best defense. The next morning, we discovered something worse. Our backyard motion light had been turned, physically redirected to shine toward the woods instead of the patio. The screws had been loosened and readjusted. Boone barked at the fence for nearly 20 minutes around 2 a.m., but I'd assumed it was a raccoon. now I wasn't so sure. This is it, Kara said. We file a report. I hesitated. They'll say it's minor, not criminal. I don't care. I'm building the record. We contacted the sheriff's office, not 911, just the non-emergency line. A deputy came out friendly enough, but cautious. Took our statement, photographed the light, jotted a few notes, but you could see it in his face he didn't want to get involved in a neighborhood squabble. I offered him a bottle of water before he left. You ever train with the tactical unit? I asked casually. He smiled. Couple years back. Brief stint. Kara probably ran your drills. His eyes widened. That was her. I nodded. He looked through the screen door toward Kara, who stood by the kitchen window, sipping tea, watching. Didn't recognize her in civvies, he said. She's a legend. Ran us through Hell Week with half the department watching. I smiled. She hasn't changed. He tipped his hat. She doesn't need backup, but she's got it anyway. After he left, we sat on the porch. I don't think she's done, Kara said. Neither do I. Karen had shifted from silent threat to invasive monitoring. She hadn't gotten what she wanted through rules notes or gossip. Now she was trying to provoke something bigger, something official. And I had a sinking feeling I knew what came next. She'll call the police, I said quietly. Kara didn't flinch. She'll fabricate danger. Say she sees a weapon. Say you're unstable or dangerous or threatening. Kara took a deep breath and looked out at the darkening yard. She won't get the outcome she wants, she said. Then she turned to me, calm as ever. She'll get the truth. The official knock came 2 days later. Not the polite kind you hear from a neighbor bringing over banana bread. Not the hesitant tap of a delivery driver hoping to avoid eye contact. This was firm, rhythmic, intentionally loud. The kind of knock that demands attention, not out of need, but out of authority. I opened the door, already knowing who it was. Karen Blevins stood on the porch, flanked by 2 HOA board members I recognized, but hadn't spoken to Philip Carter, the guy who always jogged with a Bluetooth headset, and Linda Evans, who chaired the Community Landscaping Committee. Neither of them met my eyes. Karen, however, was locked in. She held a manila envelope and wore that same practiced smile, the kind that lived just north of condescending and just south of hostile. Mr. Randall, she said, may we have a moment of your time? I'm guessing I don't have a choice. She gave a little laugh like we were sharing an inside joke. I always believe in respectful dialogue. I stepped aside. Then I assume you're here to listen too. They stepped into the foyer. Boone let out a low huff from under the table, but stayed put. Kara was upstairs. I'd told her earlier that something was coming. She didn't need to see it happen to know how it would go. Karen didn't wait long. We've received multiple complaints from residents regarding disruptive activity originating from your property. She began removing a typed document from the envelope and placing it carefully on the table. Specifically, high-impact training sessions, aggressive posturing, and the use of military-style gear in visible spaces. I didn't touch the paper, just looked at her. You've seen my wife, I said flatly. You've watched her workout. You know exactly what she's doing. Karen tilted her head. It's not about what we know. It's about how it makes others feel. There's been concern that your yard has become an unsafe environment. Children walk by. Elderly residents live nearby. It's creating a climate of tension. I could feel the tension all right, and it wasn't coming from Kara. What exactly is your goal here? I asked. You want her to stop training, cover the windows. What does compliance look like in your mind? Philip finally spoke. We'd like her to consider relocating her workouts to a gym, or at the very least, moving them to the garage. Somewhere less public. Linda nodded, her arms folded. I exhaled slowly. So let me get this straight. A decorated veteran who's trained hundreds of officers in tactical safety can't do push-ups and carry a weighted backpack in her own fenced yard because a few neighbors think it looks scary. Karen stiffened. It's not about fear. It's about atmosphere. This neighborhood has always prized unity, harmony, uniformity, I corrected. That's the word you want. We're simply enforcing the standards that keep Evergreen Pines a desirable place to live, she replied. That's funny, I said. I thought decency and integrity made it desirable, not forced conformity. There was a pause. Karen leaned forward slightly. Look, John, I know she's impressive. I know her background. But this neighborhood has rules, and she's making people uncomfortable. If that continues, we'll have to escalate. There it was, the threat. Dressed in HOA language wrapped in a veneer of policy, but a threat nonetheless. I leaned in just enough to match her gaze. Let me be clear. My wife has every right to move, breathe, and live in this home as she sees fit. She's not violating any laws, not breaking any noise ordinances, not displaying weapons. And if the idea of a strong, capable woman minding her own business causes discomfort, that says more about you than her. Karen's lips tightened. I added, but go ahead, escalate. Then I opened the door. Karen blinked. That's all. That's all. She gathered her papers, signaled the others, and walked out without another word. But before she stepped off the porch, she turned back. I hope it doesn't come to that, she said. It already has, I replied. The moment the door clicked shut, Kara came down the stairs, arms crossed. I heard every word she said. Good, I replied. She sat beside me at the table and picked up the paper Karen had left. Her eyes scanned it quickly. Violation notice with no code cited, no signature from the full board, no timestamp. She slid it aside. Amateurs. We sat in silence for a while. You know what comes next, I said. She nodded. She's going to call the police. She wants confrontation, wants you to react. I won't give her the satisfaction. That evening, Kara moved her next workout into the front yard. She didn't say anything, didn't wear anything flashy, just her usual gear black joggers, a compression top, and the same training vest she used at the academy. She carried 2 kettlebells into the grass and began a methodical series of squats, lunges, and compound drills, her expression focused, peaceful, unstoppable. Neighbors peeked from curtains. A few walked by and turned their heads quickly. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching. 10 minutes in, I saw Karen on her front lawn, phone in hand, dialing. She stared directly at Kara and smiled. That night after dinner, Kara sat across from me and said, tomorrow you'll want to be home around 6:30. Why? Because that's when the 911 call will go through. You're sure? I'm positive. And she was right. At exactly 6:32 p.m. the next evening, I heard the faint whine of sirens. It wasn't the roaring kind, the sirens of chaos and crisis, but the restrained chirp of a cruiser approaching with caution. No lights, no screeching tires, just a slow roll into the cul-de-sac, and the quiet hush of neighbors stepping out onto porches with feigned curiosity. I didn't move right away. From my seat by the front window, I could see Kara out on the lawn, stretching calmly by the edge of the flower beds. She wore her usual weighted vest, a hydration pack strapped tight to her back. The only weapon in sight was a heavy-duty resistance rope coiled on the ground next to her kettlebells. Her breathing was steady, her posture relaxed. But I could also see Karen standing 3 driveways down, phone, still in hand, arms crossed like she was waiting for a show. And now she'd summoned an audience. The cruiser pulled to the curb slowly. One officer stepped out, a young man, early 30s, clean-cut, eyes sharp. He glanced toward Kara, then checked his shoulder mic. A second officer exited the passenger side, scanning the scene as if trying to decipher the report they'd received. I stepped out onto the porch and folded my arms. Boone barked once behind the screen door, but quickly quieted. He knew tension when he felt it. The lead officer approached Kara cautiously, palm near his belt, but not threatening. Ma'am, he said evenly, we received a report of suspicious activity in the front yard. Kara turned toward him and gave a polite nod. Suspicious how the second officer joined them, standing slightly behind the first. I could see his eyes narrow as he focused on Kara's vest, the way she held herself, the calm with which she moved. Caller mentioned possible tactical gear, the first officer said, and erratic behavior. Kara raised an eyebrow. You mean my training vest and a warm-up jog? He glanced down. Looks like training gear to me. It is, she said, and I'm on my own property. The second officer stepped forward. Ma'am, I know you. Kara gave a small smile. I was wondering how long it would take. You're Sergeant Kara Randall, he said now with a note of respect in his voice. You ran the dynamic entry course at Evergreen Pines Training Academy, didn't you? That's me. I failed my first round. He grinned sheepishly. Then you made me run it blindfolded, and you passed the second time. He nodded. Fastest in the unit. The first officer looked between them, surprised. Wait. You trained SWAT. Kara didn't puff her chest. Didn't smile like she'd won anything. She just nodded. I coordinate tactical readiness for 2 counties and consult for federal de-escalation workshops, she said evenly. What else did the call say? The first officer flipped through his tablet. Possible combat simulation. Disturbance to community. Erratic, potentially hostile behavior. The second officer, Officer Michael Rojas, laughed under his breath. That's a new one. She's done this every evening, the first added. This isn't new. I stepped down from the porch and joined them. No officer. She trains in our yard daily, quietly, respectfully. She's a professional. What's new is the neighbor who doesn't like strong women exercising outside. The first officer gave a slow nod. We figured something like that. Karen approached then, as if she hadn't been lurking the entire time. Excuse me, officers, she said loudly, drawing the attention of more neighbors. I made that call because there are children on this street. Elderly people. We have rules. Officer Rojas turned toward her. And did the rules include profiling a decorated public servant and filing a false report? Karen blinked. I didn't know who she was. That's the problem, he said. Karen huffed. This isn't personal. It's becoming a pattern, I said, stepping forward. First anonymous notes, then trespass near our backyard. Now wasting emergency resources on a fake threat. Karen's face went pale. I didn't trespass. You turned our motion light and left a note on our trash bin. The first officer cleared his throat. We have your 911 recording on file, ma'am. I suggest you think carefully before continuing this conversation. Tom Harrison across the street spoke up suddenly. Let her train, he said. She's not hurting anyone. Another voice joined in. You called the police because she was doing push-ups. Karen turned toward the gathering voices, trying to save face. This isn't about exercise. This is about security. And who's making us feel unsafe, someone muttered. The tension snapped. Officer Rojas nodded to Kara, then me. No laws broken, no violations. But if this happens again, we may have to file a formal warning for misuse of emergency services. Karen opened her mouth, but stopped. Her lips tightened. Without another word, she turned and walked back toward her house. The officers thanked Kara for her time, shook her hand, and returned to their cruiser. As they pulled away, I could see one of them laughing softly behind the wheel. Kara walked up to me, her breath still calm, expression unreadable. She'll try something else, she said. I know. She's embarrassed now. Good, I said. But what I didn't say was what I feared most. Karen wouldn't stop until she was publicly vindicated or completely undone. And it looked like the undoing had begun. The official report came 3 days later. A sealed envelope tucked into our mailbox, not from the HOA this time, but from the county clerk's office. Inside confirmation that a formal complaint had been filed by Karen Blevins against my wife Kara Randall, citing unsettling behavior, disruption of public peace, and use of paramilitary tactics in a residential environment. It wasn't just a grievance anymore. Karen had elevated her crusade from neighborhood harassment to a documented campaign backed by her own dramatized version of events. The language in the complaint was slippery, packed with words like alarming, intimidating, and excessive physicality. She painted Kara as some kind of rogue operator training for an insurrection in our front yard. The irony was sharp enough to cut steel. This is exactly what she wanted, Kara said, reading the complaint over toast and black coffee. She's trying to goad me into a counterattack. Problem is, she filed it with the wrong county, I said, holding up my phone. We have 2 deputies on record testifying that no laws were broken, and both confirmed you were cooperative, composed, and unarmed. Kara smirked. Unarmed and unbeatable. Still, I could feel the shift in her. She wasn't rattled, but she was alert like a soldier back on active watch. The calm she'd been easing into after retirement was gone, replaced by a quiet, defensive posture. She didn't like being forced into corners, especially not by cowards in cardigans, and Karen, she had gone full offensive. That afternoon, as Kara was running light drills in the back, nothing loud, just form and breath control, I spotted a small white sedan parked across the street. The engine was off, windows up. A phone screen glowed behind the steering wheel. 4th time this week, I said, watching from the kitchen. Kara barely turned her head. She's recording, building evidence. against what? Me being stronger than her. Later that day, our inbox pinged with a mass Evergreen Pines Homeowners Association email. Subject line, Community Safety Proposal. It was thinly veiled suggestions for new bylaws regarding appropriate attire, outdoor activity, limits, and optics of tactical behavior. Each point had a citation pulled from vague neighborhood codes about maintaining tranquility and cohesion. And then, the final bullet, activities that cause unintentional fear in residents may be subject to board review and escalation. Karen was trying to rewrite the rules around Kara, but the best part, she CC'd the wrong thread. Two board members, Brian McAllister and Elise Thompson, immediately replied, accidentally hitting reply all. Brian McAllister, we already ruled on this. John's property is compliant. Why are we reopening it? Elise Thompson, I thought we agreed this was settled. Let's not turn Evergreen Pines into a power play. The thread blew up in real time. 10 replies in 20 minutes. Half the board members expressed concern about unilateral action. A few asked if legal counsel had vetted the language. One neighbor attached a link to the state constitution's homeowner rights clause. Karen's grasp was slipping, but her obsession was tightening. That evening around 7:40 p.m., we were eating dinner when the doorbell rang. I answered with a cloth napkin still in my hand. Karen stood on the porch, not with her usual HOA folder, but with a printed police complaint in hand. "You've left me no choice," she said without preamble. Kara appeared behind me in the hallway, calm, barefoot, holding a wine glass. Karen's eyes darted to her, then back to me. "I've filed a formal incident report with 911 dispatch. I've documented 3 consecutive days of hostile behavior. I have video timestamps and resident testimonials." "Testimonials or gossip?" Kara asked. "I have rights, you know," Karen said sharply. "We all do. We shouldn't have to live in fear." "Who's afraid of a woman doing push-ups?" Kara replied. "You are." Karen's face reddened. "You may have everyone fooled. You may have friends on the police force, but I'm not afraid of your badge or your history. You don't belong here. You act like this street is your training ground." Kara stepped forward slowly, not aggressive, not threatening, just resolute. "You called the police," she said. "You lied about a weapon. You reported a tactical threat on your neighbor. That's a false report." Karen opened her mouth, but Kara raised a hand. "Let me finish." Karen froze. "My name is Sergeant Kara Randall. I spent 18 years serving this country. I've trained hundreds of tactical officers across the state, some of whom responded to your call. I've never broken the law. I've never endangered a civilian. But I've seen what fear does to people like you." Karen shifted uneasy. "And I've also seen what happens when you try to control what you don't understand." Karen laughed nervously. "I'm not scared of you." "You are," Kara said gently. "And that's okay. But this crusade of yours, it ends now." Karen's mouth hung open for a moment. Then she thrust the printed report at me and walked off the porch without another word. I folded the paper without reading it. Inside, Kara sat back down at the table, picked up her fork, and said, "She'll call again." She just did. The next morning, a notice arrived, delivered by courier. It was from our legal counsel. Apparently, after reviewing the situation, the HOA's insurance policy had flagged Karen's conduct as a liability risk. The board was formally investigating her for harassment and abuse of process. A vote was scheduled. But even better, our lawyer had submitted a public request to the local precinct for a copy of Karen's 911 call. It was a goldmine. In the recording, Karen clearly stated, "I see a woman in military gear. She's carrying something. I think it's a rifle." There was no rifle. There never was. Just a foam-padded resistance bar used for upper body drills. Bright orange. The kind issued to rookies. And now, Karen had officially filed a false report about an armed civilian threat. With witnesses. With video proof. With intent. It was no longer just HOA drama. It was criminal. It was a Thursday evening when everything reached its boiling point. We were in the kitchen mid-conversation when I saw the blue and red lights flashing against the far wall. They weren't subtle. They weren't discreet. They lit up the house like a fireworks show, strobing through the blinds, painting everything in pulsing color. "Looks like she did it," Kara said calmly, rising from the table. She went full escalation. I moved toward the front door, but Kara stopped me. "Let me handle this," she said. "I know the drill better than anyone." Boone barked once, low and uncertain. I snapped my fingers gently. "Stay." Outside, 3 patrol vehicles had rolled into the cul-de-sac. One parked directly in front of our driveway. Another idled across the street. The third, I realized, with a dull pang of disgust, had its dash cam pointed directly at our house. Karen stood in her front yard, arms crossed, flanked by 2 of her neighbors. I couldn't hear her words, but I could read the triumphant tilt of her chin. She thought this was the moment, her moment, the one where Kara would finally be exposed, humiliated, forced to bow to the power of petty HOA rule. Instead, the exact opposite happened. The lead officer approached the house first. He moved with caution, but not suspicion. Behind him, 2 other officers fanned out eyes scanning the perimeter. Kara stepped onto the porch, calm as ever. She wore black joggers, a loose athletic shirt, and her usual training vest empty, this time, no weight plates. She carried no gear, no equipment, just her ID wallet clipped to her waistband. "Evening," she said, her tone measured. The lead officer glanced at his notes, then back up at her. "We received a 911 report of a possible armed individual. Female, military clothing, possibly aggressive." Kara raised one eyebrow. "Did they mention I was watering plants at the time Officer Michael Rojas stepped closer?" I recognized him. He blinked when he saw her. "No way," he said. "You're Sergeant Kara Randall." Kara gave a short nod. "Still am, last I checked. You ran my advanced vehicle breach course last spring," he said, now grinning. "Put me through that 4-hour endurance run at the river. I remember. You passed. Barely." The first officer turned. "Wait, you trained with her, trained under her." Rojas corrected. "She's the one who wrote the scenario drills for our last 3 SWAT cycles." The entire posture of the encounter shifted. The third officer, previously quiet, stepped forward, clearly younger. His eyes flicked between Kara and Rojas. "You're telling me this is the woman who trains our SWAT guys?" Kara folded her arms. "That's me. I don't carry weapons. I train people to think under pressure. Like now." The lead officer lowered his notepad. "So what exactly were you doing when the call came in, pacing the yard?" "Planning a lecture. Wearing this vest." She tapped it. Karen must have thought it looked threatening. That's when Rojas turned toward the cluster of neighbors on Karen's lawn. "You called 911, he said. Voice loud enough to carry. "For what?" A woman pacing her own property in workout gear, Karen stepped forward, arms tight across her chest. "I reported what I saw. She's been escalating, moving her drills into the front yard, intimidating people. That's not a crime." Rojas cut her off. "She looks aggressive, like she's planning something. She teaches de-escalation," the younger officer muttered. Karen flushed. "She has military training. We don't know what she's capable of." "You mean discipline?" Kara asked, stepping closer. "Structure, purpose." "I mean danger," Karen snapped. That's when Officer Rojas pulled out his tablet and tapped a few keys. "I've reviewed the last 2 911 calls. One claimed she had a firearm. The other claimed she was preparing for a violent event." He turned toward Kara. "Ma'am, do you possess any weapons on this property? Legally registered handgun in a locked safe," she said. "Never removed. Never displayed. Ever bring it out during your workouts?" "No." "Never." He nodded. "All right." Then he turned toward Karen again. "Do you have any proof that she's endangered anyone?" Karen hesitated. "She makes people feel unsafe. That's not a basis for emergency response. She's hostile. Sergeant Randall has never raised her voice, issued a threat, or engaged in illegal activity." He said, "You've made 3 false emergency reports. That's a misdemeanor offense." The words hit Karen like a slap. "I didn't mean—" "You meant to intimidate," Kara interrupted softly. "You've spent weeks trying to wear me down, hoping I'd react, hoping I'd break character." She stepped toward Karen, close but calm. "But I don't break." Karen looked small now. Her voice cracked. "You're not supposed to be here. People like you're too much, too strong. It's unsettling." Kara tilted her head. "Then maybe that says more about you than it does about me." The officers exchanged glances. Ma'am, Rojas said to Karen, "I'd recommend you go home and stop calling 911 unless there's an actual emergency. Your behavior is now the part of an internal review." Karen's lips trembled. She stormed back into her house and slammed the door. The officers apologized, genuinely. Rojas shook my hand. The younger one asked Kara if she'd ever consider teaching at the academy again. "I'm retired," she said with a half smile. "But I always make exceptions for people who ask respectfully." The cruisers pulled away soon after. Neighbors lingered on their lawns. No one whispered anymore. Some waved. One clapped slowly, then more joined. Kara stood in the middle of our yard, eyes steady. And for once, finally, no one looked away. No one turned their back. Respect had a sound, and tonight it was silence. It wasn't the lights or the sirens that finally broke Karen's grip on the neighborhood. It was the silence that followed. The next morning, the usual rhythm of evergreen pines shifted. Kids still biked down the sidewalks, dogs barked at squirrels, sprinklers ticked off in even rows. But there was a different energy, like the moment after a thunderclap, when you realized the storm might finally be passing. And Karen, she didn't emerge from her house that morning. Not for the trash bins, not for the mail. Not even to tend to her prized tulip bed, which she usually inspected daily, with militant precision. But we saw her curtains move. She was watching. She always watched. That same afternoon, the Evergreen Pines Homeowners Association sent out another email, this time from Brian McAllister, the vice chair who had been suspiciously absent during most of Karen's reign. Subject: emergency, HOA assembly, Saturday, 6:00 p.m. Due to recent events, the board is convening an emergency open session meeting to address growing community concerns and allegations of abuse of authority within the HOA. All residents are invited. I read the message twice before looking up at Kara, who was folding towels like nothing unusual had happened. "She's being called out," I said. "About time," Kara replied. When Saturday evening arrived, the clubhouse was packed. It hadn't seen this much activity since the 4th of July cookout. People filed in with lawn chairs, notebooks, and tension wound tight behind their polite smiles. We sat in the third row. Kara wore jeans, a soft gray t-shirt, and no tactical vest. But even without the gear, she looked like the most composed person in the room. Karen arrived last. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. Her hair was pulled tighter than ever, lips pursed, like she was preparing for battle. She wore a powder blue blouse and slacks, like she was dressing for professionalism, to cover the fray in her armor. Brian stood at the front, flanked by 2 other board members, who had visibly aged since the last election cycle. "Let's get started," he said, tapping the mic. "We've had a number of complaints filed in the past 2 weeks regarding inappropriate behavior by a member of the board, misuse of emergency services, and attempts to unilaterally enforce policy without board approval." Karen stiffened but said nothing. "We've also reviewed 911 transcripts, including the false report that led to police responding to a fabricated threat. Officers who responded have filed statements exonerating Sergeant Kara Randall of any wrongdoing and confirming the call lacked credible foundation." A quiet murmur rose from the crowd. Brian continued, "Tonight we will hear from residents. Anyone who wishes to speak will have 3 minutes." The line to the microphone was longer than anyone expected. The first to speak was Mr. Robert Davis from down the road. He cleared his throat. "I've lived here 10 years. I've never seen anything that made me feel unsafe until the day I watched a neighbor weaponize fear against another for simply being stronger than her. It wasn't right." Applause followed. Next came Elise Thompson, the landscape chair. "I was told Sergeant Randall was creating a hostile aesthetic. That's not just offensive, it's discrimination. She's a veteran. She's trained our law enforcement. We should be proud she lives here." Then Tom Harrison, the fisherman, took the mic. "I don't care what vest someone's wearing when they're watering plants. What I care about is who's calling the cops on a woman minding her own business." Every voice chipped away at Karen's wall. Each story, each observation exposed another brick in the structure she'd built with rumor and resentment. Then, without warning, Kara stood. She didn't go to the microphone. She simply turned in her seat and addressed the room. "I didn't move here to cause trouble," she said, her voice even. "I moved here to rest. I've spent most of my life training others to stay alive under pressure. What I never expected was that I'd need those same skills to survive HOA politics. Laughter, quiet but real, rippled through the room. I'm not asking for privilege. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for the same thing every neighbor deserves: peace. She paused. And I won't apologize for being strong. The room erupted in applause. Karen didn't move. Then Brian cleared his throat again. The board has reviewed the articles of conduct and concluded that Karen Blevins has violated the charter's ethics clause, misused her position for personal vendettas, and put the HOA at legal risk. Gasps. Someone whispered finally. We are issuing a formal censure and a vote of removal. He looked directly at Karen. You may speak. She stood slowly, not defiant, not poised, small. Her voice cracked as she tried to salvage dignity. I was trying to protect the neighborhood. Brian replied, from what, a woman doing sit-ups? Silence. The vote was swift. By a near unanimous show of hands, Karen was removed from her position. No one clapped, not out of cruelty, but because the moment didn't call for celebration. It called for closure. She gathered her bag papers trembling in her hands and walked out of the room alone. I didn't watch her go. I turned to Kara instead, who exhaled deeply for the first time in weeks. You okay? I asked. She smiled. I'm finally breathing again. The fallout from the emergency HOA meeting spread through Evergreen Pines like wildfire. Not the dramatic tabloid kind of fire, but the quiet glowing embers of whispered conversations on evening walks, side glances at mailboxes, and long overdue reckonings delivered over fence lines and potluck tables. By Sunday morning, Karen's removal had made its way into every household. The neighborhood forum was lit up with messages, some supportive, some cautiously neutral. A few holdouts clung to the idea that Karen had meant well, but even those voices were muted now, buried under a tidal wave of relief. Still, there were consequences, repercussions, the kind that don't make headlines but settle into the fabric of a place. The Evergreen Pines Homeowners Association leadership issued a formal statement. We acknowledge that power, when misused, can divide a community. Evergreen Pines is a place of peace, and moving forward, we are committed to transparency, fairness, and restorative action. Kara read it and gave a dry laugh. Restorative action. That sounds like PR cleanup in a sensible cardigan. But she didn't argue. She was tired, not defeated, just worn down from weeks of being watched, recorded, doubted. It wasn't just the false 911 reports or the public embarrassment. It was the slow erosion of trust. The way a few people looked at her like she didn't belong no matter how composed she stayed. And yet something had changed. That Monday, for the first time since we moved in, Kara received a thank you card, handwritten, from Mrs. Susan Langford, the same woman who once glared at her from behind a curtain. I didn't understand you. I judged what I didn't recognize. I was wrong. Thank you for showing all of us what real strength looks like. Later that week, Janice Brooks from the end of the block stopped by. She held a tray of lemon squares and an apologetic smile. I used to think you were intense, she said. Now I think you're exactly the kind of person I'd want watching over my kids if something went wrong. Kara didn't say much, just nodded and accepted the tray. But I could tell it meant something. That same night, the HOA held a public feedback session not in the stuffy clubhouse but on the open green near the retention pond. No microphones, no folding tables, just neighbors folding chairs and a fire pit someone dragged out from their patio. The board, newly restructured with Brian McAllister as president, listened more than they spoke. People shared frustrations about the old leadership, but also ideas, community gardens, a safety patrol, not run by Karen, thankfully, and maybe even a neighborhood skills series. That's when Elise Thompson stood up. She was holding a flyer. So, funny story, she said, I was cleaning out my garage and Ann found an old self-defense class sign-up sheet from 2 years ago. It had 5 names on it and got tossed. But after everything that's happened, I think we should try again. She looked at Kara. Only this time, I know exactly who should teach it. Heads turned. A few clapped. Kara blinked, taken aback. Me. You're overqualified, someone shouted. Kara chuckled, then stood. I'm retired, she said, but I still remember how to throw someone twice my size. More laughter, then applause. The session ended with neighbors exchanging phone numbers, volunteer lists forming, and a long overdue sense of unity returning to the street. The next morning, Kara received an email from the County Public Safety Office. Apparently, one of the responding officers had mentioned her name to the regional training coordinator. They were opening applications for part-time instructors, specifically those with real-world SWAT experience and civilian communication expertise. "Looks like you're being recruited again," I said, reading over her shoulder. Kara shrugged. "I didn't even apply. You didn't have to, you?" That afternoon, she set up a few cones on the green near the pond and tested a few drills. Nothing aggressive, just movement spacing and stance. Within 10 minutes, 5 teenagers had joined her. Within 30, 3 moms were following along. No one watched from behind blinds. They stepped forward. Karen's house, meanwhile, stayed quiet. Her tulips began to wilt. No one came to water them. By the end of the week, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. No goodbye note, no garage sale. Just the quiet resignation of someone who thought fear could win and learned otherwise. That weekend, I watched Kara lead the first official community situational awareness and self-defense class for Evergreen Pines. She stood tall in the fading sun, surrounded by neighbors who had once whispered about her behind fences and now copied her every move. She demonstrated a simple stance shift, then said, "It's not about strength. It's about knowing where you stand and how not to be moved." I watched from a distance. That line stayed with me. Because in the end, that's what Kara had taught all of us, not how to fight, but how to stand. How to refuse to shrink. How to remain unmoved by intimidation disguised as decorum. Karen may have started the fight, but Kara finished it with stillness, with integrity, with a strength you can't measure in weight plates or rank. And Evergreen Pines, it finally felt like home. When the dust finally settled after that disastrous HOA meeting, Kara and I sat on the back porch watching the sprinklers flick across the lawn. The tension in Evergreen Pines hadn't vanished overnight, but something had shifted. It was the quiet, the kind that came after a storm, not before it. Karen's house remained shuttered. Her tulip garden, once a symbol of HOA perfectionism, had started to wilt without her vigilant care. Her voice, once the loudest in every meeting, was gone. But something new was beginning to take its place. It started 2 days after the meeting, when Elise Thompson from the HOA Landscaping Committee dropped by with a tray of lemon bars and an unexpected request. "We've been talking," she said, standing awkwardly at our front door, "about everything that happened, the fear, the misunderstanding, and your wife." Kara glanced up from tying her running shoes. "What about me?" Elise fidgeted. "Would you maybe consider leading a safety workshop for the neighborhood? Basic self-defense, awareness drills, not just for the women, everyone. Especially after what happened." I half expected Kara to decline. She'd spent her career training people who already knew how to fight. This would be different. But instead she stood still for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'll do it," she said. "But I won't sugarcoat it." Elise exhaled in relief. "That's exactly why we asked you." Word spread faster than we expected. Within 48 hours, over 40 residents had signed up, teenagers, single parents, even a few retirees who joked about learning grandma judo. The HOA clubhouse, once a symbol of division, was chosen as the venue. Symbolic, maybe. Or maybe just practical. Either way, it worked. Kara spent the next few evenings designing a one-day course. Not just physical maneuvers, but situational awareness, de-escalation tactics, boundary assertion, and what she called urban calm, the ability to stay centered in chaos. "You're not teaching people how to fight?" I asked one night as she reviewed her notes. "No," she said. "I'm teaching them how not to flinch." The day of the workshop, Kara wore simple black athletic gear. No badges, no logos, just presence, confidence, focus. I helped set up folding mats, a few cones, and printed flyers about emergency resources. Meanwhile, neighbors filed in, some curious, some nervous, some clearly still processing what had happened the week before. Kara stood at the front and looked at them all, then said the one thing that broke the last wall between her and the community. "I'm not here because I want to be," she said. "I'm here because I know what fear does to people and how easy it is to let it turn into something uglier." She paused, scanning the room. "I spent years training teams to enter hostile buildings and rescue hostages. But the truth is, the scariest places I've ever walked into were rooms where I wasn't welcome, where people thought they knew who I was without asking." There was a beat of silence, then a few quiet nods. So today she said, we're not going to talk about combat. We're going to talk about power. Your power. How to find it, hold it, and protect it without hurting someone else. The first session focused on simple postures, how to stand tall, how to project calm authority. Then came verbal tactics, how to say no without apology, how to end a conversation that feels wrong, how to call for help with clarity, not panic. By noon, people weren't just watching, they were participating. Mr. Robert Davis took down a simulated threat using nothing more than his walking cane and some sharp footwork. 13-year-old Alyssa Lee practiced boundary-setting lines with such conviction that even the adults paused to listen. Even Brian McAllister, the new HOA president, showed up halfway through and quietly joined the last drills. Karen, of course, didn't show. But that didn't matter. Her absence wasn't the point anymore. This wasn't about her. It was about the people who stayed. By the end of the workshop, neighbors stood in circles talking, really talking for the first time in months. Swapping stories, checking in on each other, asking Kara if she'd be willing to do it again, maybe once a month. Kara hesitated, then smiled. Let's make it quarterly, she said. But if you bring lemon bars, I might upgrade it to monthly. That earned genuine laughter, the kind that comes from letting go of fear. That evening, back on the porch, we watched the sun dip behind the lake. Kara sat with her boots untied, drinking tea. You know, she said softly, I always thought retirement would feel like retreat. Doesn't seem like you're retreating, I replied. She chuckled. No, it feels like I'm finally stepping forward. A few weeks after Kara's workshop, Evergreen Pines didn't just return to normal, it evolved. For the first time since we moved in, the air around the neighborhood felt light. People no longer averted their gaze at the mailbox or speed-walked past our driveway. Instead, we got waves, nods, the occasional chat about irrigation systems or high school football. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Kara didn't seek the spotlight. She never had. But somehow the community kept circling back to her. The Evergreen Pines Homeowners Association Board, now led by Brian McAllister, with a few newly appointed members who seemed to value transparency over tyranny, invited Kara to become the official community safety advisor. The title didn't come with pay or perks, just access to clubhouse facilities and a voice during monthly meetings. She politely declined the title, but agreed to keep hosting workshops. Let's keep it civilian, she told them. Less red tape, more trust. What truly marked the turning point was what happened to Karen. She didn't leave immediately. For a time, she kept a low profile, only emerging for early morning trash bins or the occasional grocery run. But the neighborhood had changed, and it no longer bent around her energy. The whispers that once centered around Kara were now directed at her. When the next HOA newsletter went out, Karen's name was absent. 3 months later, her house went up for sale. No farewell, no explanation, just a silent exit from the stage she had once controlled. And while her presence faded, Kara's influence quietly grew. Janice Brooks, a single mom down the street, asked Kara to walk her daughter through confidence drills before a cross-state college interview. A retired firefighter, Greg Miller, brought Kara a thermos of coffee and said, "You remind me of someone I used to serve with." She never blinked. And one morning, as we were sipping coffee on the porch, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. It wasn't marked, but Kara stiffened the moment it stopped. Director James Whitaker, in a navy blue jacket, stepped out wearing the county's public safety emblem. "I know I should have called," he said, walking up. "But I heard about your workshops, about what happened here. And frankly, I think we need someone like you." Kara raised an eyebrow. "Need me for what?" He smiled. "To help build a training program, something real, for civilians. We've had the funding, but no one who could speak to both law enforcement and the people they're sworn to protect." Kara didn't answer right away. "I'm retired," she said after a pause. "Then let's call it a new chapter," he replied. That night, she didn't sleep much. I watched her pace, flip through old training manuals, pull out boxes labeled previous life from the attic. The next morning, she sat down at the kitchen table and said simply, "It's time." And just like that, she re-entered the world on her own terms. Not as someone hiding strength in a quiet suburban neighborhood, but as a woman whose strength shaped the very fabric of her community. The next few months were beautiful in a way only hard-won peace can be. The lake near our home hosted early morning yoga sessions. The old HOA clubhouse turned into a shared space for everything from CPR classes to teen tutoring nights. And Kara, once the subject of suspicion and 911 calls, was now the respected foundation beneath it all. She never gloated, never brought up Karen again. She didn't need to, because the neighborhood no longer defined her by what they feared, only by what she gave. She became known as Coach Kara to the kids' commander, to a few joking retirees, and to the rest of us just Kara, the woman who stood tall when others tried to shrink her. And me, I got to witness it all, not as the hero of the story, but as the husband who finally saw his wife, not through the lens of retirement, but through the full clarity of her resilience. People say that strength is loud, explosive, dominant. They're wrong. Sometimes strength is quiet. It's steady. It shows up in the morning, ties its laces, and stretches in the backyard, even when it knows the blinds are watching. It shows up again after 911 is dialed, after police lights flare, after neighbors whisper. It shows up when it teaches, when it forgives, when it stays. Kara stayed. She trained an entire SWAT unit in a previous life. But in this neighborhood, she trained something far rarer: compassion backed by readiness. Softness wrapped in steel. That is the woman I married. That is the woman Evergreen Pines came to know. And in the quiet peace of our new life, with the lake shimmering behind us and the house finally feeling like home, I realized it's not about being feared. It's about being respected. And Kara had earned every ounce of it.